your physiological side. So we need to give it recovery time. Then you have your psychological recovery. So if we're pushing for performance, or we're learning new routines, doing spacing, doing all those, it's mentally fatiguing. Right. So that like cognitive side of it is a whole nother thing. So those are kind of our two avenues of recovery that we need to think about. So with our physiological, our body tissue side of it, sleep is another big factor. So that's about 7 hours of sleep on average to give yourself time for full like tissue recovery and healing and remodeling. In a short term, we can cool down from our exercises. So if we're like go in our dance class or technique class, having a cool down actually is recovery. So that is included. And then even if we were like, our dance was like really high energy, high impact, and we've been going like that for a couple days, couple weeks, pairing it with a low load or low intensity is actually considered recovery as well. So those are things we want to think about. The low load intensity can be joint stabilization. It can be kind of range of motion, not like passive stretches, more like dynamically moving through positions. And then also going over like muscle movement patterns that are dance related. So you might not be dancing, but it's more that like free form movement type of a thing. And then you have on the the psychological side, where it's more mental. So like I mentioned, doing dance and like learning spacing, choreography, all that's mentally challenging. So adding in relaxation techniques, so different breathing, belly breaths, more calming exercises, journaling, little things that can kind of just take them out of the headspace of like learning content. And then also sleep plays a factor in here as well. So that's mindful rest time. And then social interaction with others. Again, it comes into play with a mental rest because we're not getting that same sort of like you have to memorize and learn everything. It's just a little bit of an offload. Right. So that's kind of what rest and recovery are. So it doesn't have to be doing nothing. It's making sure we get good sleep and making sure we give our body, both mentally and physically, time to recover from the challenge we put forth going into rest times.
So, I mean, I think that this definitely applies to all athletes, and dancers are in the athlete category. I think that we need to establish that first. Dancers are definitely in the athlete category.
Dancers are especially bad at it, though.
Right. I mean, dancers are horrible at it. Like
dancers like the artist athlete because it's both. Because art, you kind of have to keep using your tool and you have to keep working at it to get better at it. But then you also have to come out from the perspective of an athlete where like your body's your tool. So to maintain the tool, you have to be able to, like an artist would never not like wash the brushes, right? So you have to make sure you're caring for your tool to be able to do what you want to do. So it's an artist athlete.
I love that analogy. I think that like Bree said, dancers are really bad at it. I mean, even football has an off season where they're in camp or they're in training. The NFL, every team has a bye week where they don't play. Like they build in these things for professional athletes. And I'm sure everybody's seen the shirt where there's no off season in dance because there isn't an off season in dance. And I think that we have just become accustomed to that happening. But with that, I really want to know, Dr. Ferguson, what are the dangers of that? What are the dangers of not having that rest and recovery period?
So it's all tied into performance. So through performance, you have, again, the same, like the physiological side and the psychological side. So to be like high level performance, you need to be strong, flexible, have endurance, have speed, right? Like those are the physical. You also need to be like mentally like concentrated, ready to go, have the motivation to do and the willingness to do it. That's how you create good performance. So if we're not giving ourselves that regenerative time, our mental fatigue is in. So then we're losing things like coordination, stability. We're like, even just like the basics of being in a dance or performance or on stage, like when you're tired, you might make little mistakes, which could cause an injury just from like colliding and things like that. You're more prone to those types of things. When we're also not getting that regenerative restoring time, we're doing other things more detrimental, like musculoskeletally. So we're getting like sprains, strains, we're having major overuse injuries. About 50% of injuries in young athletes and adult athletes are overuse. So that's that repetitive same load onto the tissue over and over and over. So it actually causes inflammation and troubles there. So there's a bunch of different things to think about. We've talked a lot about even like the mental side of it, looking long term too. So those are more the short term things, the coordination, kind of the mental fatigue, not able to retain whatever material we're learning, or having just kind of like aches, pains, troubles. Long term, outside of that, like on the mental side, we kind of, dancers are, I find when I work with them as adults, their self-esteem is matched up with their ability to perform and their ability to do something physically. So if they're having trouble doing something physically, the self-esteem drops. So that's like a long-term mental component of it. Also just like lifestyle balances. If we're like all or nothing, or the show must go on, we aren't creating a balanced lifestyle.
Right.
And then more musculoskeletally, so within the actual body itself, if we're just go, go, go and not giving our tissue time to remodel, you actually won't get stronger. You're just causing wear and tear on your structures. Right. And for our growing athletes, that could be bones. So that's like your shin splints, your stress fractures. The bones aren't mature enough to handle that repetitive load. The tendons can have inflammation, and then you can get your tendinopathies, and it can change the actual texture of the tissue. You can cause some joint instability. You can get wear and tear of our cartilage, which becomes more of a surgical intervention, like 30s, 40s, 50s years of age. Right. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into not giving yourself adequate time now.
Which is why programs like Sugarfoot therapy and, all the things that are out there for dancers, it is changing and it is getting better. And we are recognizing that this is a problem. That's why we created Apolla Shocks. Like it was our motivation. So it's good to see that that's out there, but you're talking so much about all these other things that the mental, the sleep habit, the social interaction, the mental fatigue that you go through. We have so many dancers who are, they're living in the studio, but then outside of that, their school load is enormous. What they're expected now to juggle with school and social pressures, and then you add the social media to that, and all the anxiety that they carry around, is that contributing to a lot of the injuries and things that we're seeing with dancers, and do we need to start thinking about incorporating some other tools into their training schedule at the studio so that they're better equipped to handle all of this?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, because like I said, they're like social media is flooded. Because I'm sure like with the algorithms, you press one thing of dance, and then all of your search, everything is dance.
You're flooded, yeah.
Like turn off of dance. They just like live and breathe it all day, every day. So they aren't getting that even like mental rest and recovery with it.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I think that's a really clear way to process rest and recovery, because I know those terms get linked together a lot, and they're not the same. They're very different. So, Katie, the concept of using rest we talked about as one of the tools for a whole healthy, happy dancer. It's important, right? But why do you think dancers have such a hard time with this concept? How many times in your experience has rest truly been the answer for an injury or for a problem that a dancer is facing?
It definitely can be an answer. I think growing up as a studio kid, and being very within that culture, and then dancing in college and then beyond, rest is just culturally associated with being hurt, not being able to perform. It is all or nothing. So there's a negative connotation automatically associated with rest. It's either that you're hurt and incapable of performing, or that you don't have the drive to push and push and push. And so there is, whether you're analyzing it or not, like if I stop for a second, like, yeah, I have a negative connotation with rest that's like ingrained in me. And now I know better, but it's still so ingrained to me that like, you have to be hustling every day. And even, and then professionally thinking as a freelance artist, like it's so ingrained that even if I'm not in the studio training, like I am always networking, making connections, staying up to date on the latest and greatest and what's out there. And it's exhausting.
But also what happens when you're aware of that and okay, I'm aware that I have this negative connotation with the word rest and the word recovery. So I'm going to change that. But then you're a young dancer and you go to a studio that the culture is not that, and the studio director does not understand that, and they, because dance is so cyclical and people repeat what they were taught and there is no standard to change that, right? We talk about that a lot on the show and in conversations that we have, that dance is not regulated in terms of the way that we're teaching, the expectations that are met, and the way that we treat our bodies, like the artists and the athletes that we are. So how do you reconcile that as a young dancer who, and I'm talking specifically competitive studios, because I feel like those dancers are really pushing the limits to what their bodies, their minds can do and should do for the age that they are. So
it has to come from the top. The teachers and the studio owners have to be aligned in this, and they have to be aligned with the parents. These adults have to take responsibility for this. We cannot leave it up to the kids and teens to make these decisions for themselves. It has to be a very regular dialogue that not only is our rest and recovery okay, they are absolutely necessary. And you can't say, oh, make sure you get enough rest. Like, you have to tell them when to rest. You have to explicitly tell them, this week, I do not want you to dance. These days, do not take a dance class online. Like, it has to be very explicit. We cannot leave it up to them. And everybody does have to be aligned. It can't, because all the time, like when we do our Sugarfoot teacher trainings, we have so many teachers come take our course that, are kind of enlightened or curious about what's new and what's out there. And so often we hear, oh, I know all of this, but the 3 other teachers at my studio, then make them sit in passive splits and, do these old practices that we now know aren't serving us. So whether we're talking stretching or rest, all the parties really need to be aligned. And that's not an easy task.
No, it's not. And I still don't know how we accomplish it. I feel like I said earlier, we're getting there. And there's definitely been some progress in terms of awareness, but the overarching, solution and how we get this to happen at the studio level with the directors, with the owners is overwhelming at times. I was just saying that to Melissa, and, it's one of our guests last week. They said, when you don't feel bad about what you don't know. If you haven't known to this point what's right, what's wrong, you've done what you've done, you can't go backwards and you can't be down on yourself. But from this moment on, if you know, the expectation has to be that you are going to execute, that you are going to do better, because we can't just live in this place of like, oh, I know, but I'm not going to do anything to change it, and I think that's so valid and so important here with this conversation, because I think there are people that maybe they know up here, but the systems and the processes that they have in place it's just too overwhelming for them to make that change at this moment,
Yeah.
And we have a dancer on here. Elizabeth Kessler says rest equals weakness, at least in the ballet world. Kind of confirming what you just said.
In the studio world too.
Yeah, very much so. So I think it's important that parents and students, they, know and learn as much as you can on your own, because I think that if you can go back to your director and in a kind, polite, respectful way, say, I found out about this program and you may not know about it, but I want to tell you about it. And if you can do that in your off hours while your studio is playing catch up to some of these practices and some of these thoughts, it is important for parents, don't you think, for parents and kids to kind of be aware and understand what's out there in terms of resources for them? Do you agree? Because it could be a little overwhelming for a parent to go, well, I can do all this and I can support my dancer, but then they're going to go to the studio and it's going to be thrown out the window.
Yeah. No, it is important for them to know what's out there, but and you know, and this is going to sound extreme, but I would say if the studio is a culture where you try to take new ideas or and very non-aggressively say, hey, this is really interesting, look at what I found. If it's an environment where that's just shut down and not even considered, it's probably not a good environment for your child to be in at all. As a human, as a parent. So that's
And
how
sadly, that's a reality. It is a reality. I mean, we're being honest on the show, and we like to be a little transparent. That's what is going on out there, and in so many cases, and it shouldn't be. So, thank you guys for breaking that down. Before I go into the next segment, I want to remind you guys we're here with Katie Shar and Dr. Tracy Ferguson, physical therapist, and we're talking about to rest or not to rest, dancing through holiday breaks. I'm Bree with Apolla, and my co-host and friend Melissa McDaniel is here. Katie, we've had this conversation many times, and the perspectives are very black and white. Is it good to rest completely over a holiday break, or maintain the same schedule that you always maintain so that your body is doing what it's used to doing? Or is the answer somewhere in between that?
Well, I'll let Tracy, come at this from a clinical angle, but as a, decades long dancer and choreographer and working artist, for me, it's somewhere in between, but leaning more towards rest. One of my most influential mentors in the dance world is Tice Diorio. And I remember when I was in college, we were working on a project, and he said, you're not really a great dancer until you've had an affair and a mortgage. And and
words to live by.
Of course he didn't mean that literally, but as I matured and experienced more of life, I really understood what he meant by that. And it's that, you can spend all the time in the studio, but if you don't go out and experience life, what kind of artist are you? And how are people going to relate to you if you haven't experienced relationships and the joy and warmth of the holidays and relaxation and understanding those contrasts of, high intense activity and pure relaxation?
Well, because that's life, and our job first and foremost as an artist is to be able to connect to human emotion and life experiences and be able to project that through our movement. So it really is embracing life. And I didn't get that, like when I was in my earlier years as a director, I got so much better about this as time went on, but it just would irk me because the kids would dedicate so much of themselves to dance and this art and this craft, and they're just such amazing athletes, and the discipline it takes. And the parents would come in and go, I want them to have a normal high school. That high school burnout would start. It never fails. High school level, 2 years in, I want them to have the high school experience. They can't, we can't commit to the hours anymore. And I get it as a parent. I get that now, and that need to, they were talking about life. They were talking about those life experiences that just make us all human and relate and connect to other people. And they were afraid their kid was going to lose that and miss out on that time in their life. And I get that.
And it's so critical for the parents and also the teachers and studio owners to be willing to respond in the moment and adapt. Mm-hmm. I mean, this goes down to even your day-to-day class curriculum, if your kids come in and they look exhausted and they're not motivated to be there, I wouldn't force them to do rigorous physical activity.
That day we need to chill and maybe do some.
Sometimes even good stress isn't good stress. Physical movement's great for you, but if you're fatigued and your battery's on empty, you don't have enough to give it. So
you have to be willing to change courses kind of on the spot. And, if a parent comes to you with that, you have to be willing to go, you know what? Yeah, let's take a day off. Let's, what we're doing is not serving this child.
Right.
So to clarify, a holiday break, we get 2 weeks off. like rest the whole time or just dance a little bit?
I'll take it on this one. Okay, so it's so variable between how much they go into it with, like what is their activity level going in, because that will affect how much they should do in recovery and rest periods, right? So like if they're like up here, we want to think about like, and if they haven't gotten any rest, they might have to like drop off a little bit more than ones who had kind of like what we call like microcycles of like outperform, get recovery, outperform, get recovery.
Mhm.
They're running a smooth baseline. But if they're just like ding, 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 they're going to need to come down. They don't need to like drop all the way to the basement, but like, you know, a little mid-range.
Yeah.
So it does depend on how many hours they're putting in before. I'll put in my little caveat of like the amount of hours a dancer and athlete should be doing as they age the number of hours a week should equal their age. So
Girl, this is going to be a whole nother episode. That is a whole nother
Just
episode.
turn everybody on their head here.
Yeah.
Their max level is if you're 80, you should not be doing more than 8 hours. Over 15 hours a week is high risk for injury. So that's even just like you might be 16, but you're doing 15 hours a week of dance. You're already on my like yellow flag list of I'm going to be watching for some injury. So that's
anybody watching right now is like crawling under like the table.
I know I had a few soapboxes to step on with today's conversation.
No, but I've heard that, and it is a staggering fact, and you know, something I think we are going to have to progressively try to get better at as an industry.
So taking them into what is considered a rest or recovery state, they can be doing about like 2 times a week,
okay,
like maybe 30 minutes. And this is, I'm talking high school ages.
Melissa, you're like,
my minis, I would give you like maybe 1 to 2 10-minute sessions a week. And it is nothing that looks like dance. It has I wouldn't say really anything plyometric. I would take all jumping out because they do so much of that. Releves, not really, just because again, that's something, especially if they're doing a lot of ballet, I'd take that out. I would be doing much more like purposeful joint range of motion control.
So what are those activities? Like give an example.
So
like
ankle circles are my easiest one to give you. So like, but not just like you're flopping your ankle around, right? Like you're purposely moving through like a molasses or honey. And you can do that with the arm, big arm circles. And I'm like, full force, actively resisting myself. You can do that with the hips, the shoulders, the neck, the back, kind of similar to like isolations that we would do in dance classes or like rondages, that type of stuff. But instead of just going through it, you're like fighting for more range, but also fighting to control against yourself. So like that type of a thing is something that you could do. You can do like dynamic stretching mobility. So you don't feel like all like you haven't moved in days.
Right.
But I wouldn't do any passive stretches. And so that's kind of what it would look like to me. So it would look very different than like a strength training program. Like I would do maybe some low level intensity exercises where you could do some like side lying hip activation ones. You can do a little bit of core, like just kind of like easy, chill, getting some muscular activation, but it's not going to be this big, hard, dynamic, like pump for a certain amount of time because they need it to be a little more restorative.
So interesting, Melissa. What are your thoughts? Because
I'm over here like, can I get in? Because I have to speak. So I'm a competition director at a studio, and I have to speak what I'm pretty sure that most other competition teachers out there who are listening are thinking like, are you serious? What are we supposed to do about stamina? They won't be able to make it through a 2-minute dance when they come back if they do nothing for 2 weeks. So that's a tough concept for us. What do you like stamina wise? How do you think we should address that?
Endurance capabilities doesn't drop off that quickly. There might be a little regression, yes, but it will give their body time to heal and remodel other things, and actually gives their body time to create more power and strength, which will like growing and strengthening muscles does relate into endurance. So they shouldn't lose it too much. Like, yeah, you might have a couple days of kind of getting back in the rhythm. Because there's other things that play into it, like diet plays into it. In the holidays, you're eating lots of food that can be a little heavier. So that also can slow them down a little too. So there are just different factors that go into it. And I definitely don't want them to do nothing, but they, like, depending on their age, like, play, get outside, go run around,
ride a bike,
do anything else, because that's all cardiovascularly challenging, you know? So it's just something else that's different, that's not dance. So like because where we get overuse issues is like dance is literally you're in the same position. Like if you're doing like jumps and first, right? Like it's the same type of load over and over and over and over. So having a different type of movement in a slightly different position is going to make it so that it's not just straining the same muscles over and over. And then you go back from a 2-week period and you are just continuing to do the same issue that you were doing. So just changing what they're doing, they can still get muscle activity. They can still do range of motion exercises that are active and mobile. So they aren't going to get tight or anything like that. And then working on their joint stability will help them like longer term. So like maybe their first week's a little slower and you have to ramp them back in. Like when we're talking athletes, like we talked about having an off season, right? And all these athletes we keep talking about, they have preseason. So what preseason is a building block step up to high performance level. So when we take a break, because let's say they're at that high level, we take a break, they might drop down. And then depending on how much time until maybe your next competition or when competition season starts after the holidays, like how much time do you have? Like, can they be here and you need to get them back up here and there's a ramp up period? Yeah. And that's what they should have. And that's what the body responds better because they'll be able to perform at that higher level for longer if they have the right kind of ramp up. So it's not just nothing to everything.
And this is where, you know, in the competitive studio environment, beyond just looking at like hours per week, you might have to reconsider even like how many competition pieces are we aiming to do this year? Because it's probably not realistic to have like 3 solos, 2 duets, 4 small groups, you know, that's so much in the hours you would have to put in. And so it's about quality over quantity. And then like the really relishing the moments that you get on the stage and really relishing the creation process for each piece instead of just overloading it and burnout. You know, there are physiological and artistic advantages to kind of maybe pull it back.
And even like, so like the goal of us and the goal of these dancers, the goals of us is they want to be dancers, right? And so like, how long do they want to be dancers for? Do they want to be dancers till 19 and then they're done because their body's totally shot? Or do they want to be a dancer their whole life and to be able to perform at high levels because that's what feels good to them? So like we have to think of the long game here, because if we're just aiming for the best competition season that we can have with the most dances and the most like interesting year, that's such short-term thought process. We want to be like this epic dancer at 40, like why not? So if we're aiming for that, they need more ramp ups and more like a slower, like it's a little bit of a slower process.
And maybe as a studio director too, we're not like, I'll use myself as an example. There was this one competition convention, you know, we would come back from the holidays, the kids would come back like, and then we would have this, you know, competition at the end of January, you know, so they virtually had 3 weeks to come back. I think I did that for 2 years. And then I was like, as much as I love going to this thing, like we are not doing this anymore because I was turning into a raging psycho. My teaching staff were turning into crazy people. The kids were unhappy. It was just a holy mess. And, you know, I think using that, we should be making more conscious decisions. Know the students that you have, know their process, and know that if you just can't compete until the end of February, then so be it. You know, change your schedule.
And if like we talked about performance being mental and physical. So right now, like most of our conversation we've had in the last few minutes has been very physical. So like, is there strength there, endurance there, power there, all of those things? Like, is there headspace there? Are they ready to like go balls to the wall like at this point? Or do they need a ramp back into it? Because that's a that's a whole half of what performance is the willingness and that like drive to do it in that moment. Because if they're not mentally there to do it, then yeah, they're not going to hit the high performance level or like be able to run through the dance smoothly and cleanly. They like if mental isn't there, it's not going to happen. So it has to be multifactorial. So we have to make sure that like they're back in the rhythm of being in the studio and doing the stuff and kind of ramping not only just physically, but ramping mentally back into it as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Melissa, do you want to go into the next segment?
Yeah, we definitely can. There are a few comments out there in the Facebook world. Trishan was saying there should definitely be a balance, and young dancers need rest for their bodies to grow and their growth plates to grow and all that stuff to work together. They should not sit on the couch for a week. Very true, Trishan. Thank you very much. But they do need to still stretch and do less strenuous activities than their normal routine. So we are not giving you permission, young dancers who are listening out there, to sit on the couch for a week. I know some of mine are probably listening and they're like, yay! No.
That's not what I'm saying. I'll be clear with that as well. I'm not saying you can sit on the couch.
Not what we're saying.
And like learning to listen to their bodies, even like if you feel like you physically have the desire to move, like go move.
Yeah.
But try moving in a way that's not your regular dance class or routine.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that includes solos, because I think parents and kids get in this mindset over break that like, I'm going to be in the studio every day cranking on my solo and I'm going to get ahead because they don't have as much time to go at it, during their normal schedule. And so, then we ramp up solos so this goes for everything. It's not just, it's dance movement, period. Just take a chill pill, basically.
It's not in 2 weeks, you're not going to lose your point in your progress.
Right.
It just feels like it, Katie. It feels like it. It just feels like it. I'll get over it. I'm learning so much. I will get over it.
You need to do this. You need to put all this into practice, Melissa, and tell us how it works.
I'm gonna do it.
Okay.
I'm gonna be biting my nails, but I'm gonna do it. So this one is for both Katie and Dr. Ferguson. What should dance educators, company directors, competition directors consider when planning the season for the dancer? Because I know you're talking about ramp up and being able to have those moments of rest and recovery. So I think we have to really plan that in advance and plan it out from where we are. So by that, I mean, in terms of like what's a good time do we need to build in? What's a good scheduling? You kind of already answered this of rest versus rigor.
And I want to add one more question to that. How much of this should be dance technique versus strength training versus stretching versus, other mental connection?
Great question.
Great question.
We wrote an article on this topic for Apolla's blog.
Yes.
The beautiful thing about that age number is it gives us a real number to work with. And this isn't something we just made up. This comes from a published study done out of Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, a very expansive research. Kids who train, their number and age per week were just astronomically less hurt and less likely to get hurt. It was like the evidence was clear as day.
Yeah.
And so that's your starting point. You're looking at each age group and going, okay, 8-year-olds, they get 8 hours a week. You also have to think about what they're doing outside of the dance studio.
It's total dance exposure to the child. So multiple studios, multiple like school, home.
Are they in cheerleading, which is
counts.
Very similar.
Gymnastics counts also. Yeah.
And that number also has to, correct me if I'm wrong, include their strength training.
Yeah, it's physically active in sport-related movement.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. Especially for kids that are trying to do multiple things. That's
right. But there is It's a bit of a cross-training factor. So cross-training is actually beneficial to a child. So, and that's like not being sport specific. So if they're doing like, if they're playing soccer, if they're like swimming, like those still kind of the total hours are in that, like you want the max per age, but it's at least a different type of stress and load on the body. So it's that actually makes it a little bit easier to.
Just to clarify, because I'm wondering this, is it that the amount of hours is total combined with all the physical activities that they do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Just wow.
And, you know, if I were, and again, I know this is not an easy task, but I would really include the parents in the conversation at the beginning, before the season, when you're setting up your schedule. You know, you want to survey the parents, find out what they are all doing outside of the studio. It shouldn't be like separate things where you don't really know. You want to know and be explicit. Listen, these 18-year-olds shouldn't be physically training more than 10 hours a week. So I want to know this so we can work together, and we can all make decisions about how much time they're spending here and there. And I think, you know, laying that out and making it a dialogue with the parents and all of the other teachers is going to help get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the first one. I think the other question was more dance technique versus strength and conditioning. So even having like a dedicated hour to strength and conditioning a week in dancers actually does show a return. So like obviously we need time for like to go over techniques. You do need to learn the dance technique. There's dances you need to learn your routines, but being able to dedicate like at least an hour's worth of your time to cross training, so strength conditioning, those types of things, you'll actually see a better return out of the technique you're putting in, and they'll perform better, be less likely to get injured as well. So it definitely has, that would be like my perfect world. And that might mean sacrificing a technique class, or if they're doing less competition classes, there might have to be like a give and take in it, but that would be like my perfect world. But at least having some strength and conditioning and some dance supportive movements. So it's not quite dance, but it is activating muscles that need to be active for stabilization, power, and performance in dance. Having that in your warm up, so that way you can kind of sprinkle it in throughout your week if you aren't able to dedicate a full class to it.
Which Sugarfoot Therapy has great warm-up suggestions for that. Just saying.
And great conditioning classes for that at least 1 hour in your week.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I wanted to just touch on, because I think you mentioned it in the question, is when you're planning your season and what conventions, competitions are we going to do, you have to adapt your schedule around those events. So, you know, and I know this from growing up in a studio, usually like leading up to the competition in those weeks, your hours are like doubled because you're doing all your technique classes and you're adding on all the extra rehearsals, which is not ideal. But if that's what happens, you know, hopefully you can maybe replace some of the technique classes with the rehearsals during those weeks and not just layer it all on top of the other.
We did that a lot. Like,
yes, and that's a great way to do it. But it's just always about being willing and able to adapt.
Yeah.
And having a plan helps. And then what are you doing following that event? Because if they just spent 20 hours dancing over the weekend, should we come in full force on Monday? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
In fact, you should probably give them rest days on Monday and Tuesday.
Because they didn't have the normal weekend. So
all the kids that wanted to stay home after convention, they were right.
Right? Conventions especially, because conventions, like, they're go on top of their dances. So that's a lot of dance exposure for the week for them. And usually the flooring's not as great. Like, you're on flooring, you know? So it's a lot of impact through their bones. And we had someone talk about growth plates, and it's huge for ages. It's I think we talked to a pediatric sports physician actually this week, and he talked a lot about kind of that repetition of impact on growth plates right before a growth spurt is about to happen, your body's actually giving more calcium for the bones to elongate, so they actually won't be as efficient in their shock absorption. So it puts a little more strain. That's when you can get things like shin splints and different types of like overuse injuries to the growth plates themselves. So it is very important to do. We talked about planning. I said kind of earlier about like kind of microcycles of performance and recovery. So getting that thought process going throughout the week, because that will make the need for like long-term recovery rest periods less needed during your season. So adding like how we gain our performance and how we become more of a high level athlete is by that overreaching concept. So you're performing high to get better, but then giving yourself like a low. So thinking of that like intervals. So coming into something that's a little bit more of that recovery, be it joint stabilization, dynamic movement, but not necessarily high impact, high intensity. So they get maybe more breaks. It's just a little bit more chill. And then kind of using that type of cycling in it will make it so that they can go longer at being at that level versus having to kind of like go all or completely nothing. So,
and I think we talked about this in our article, but maybe in those days following an event like a convention, you know, maybe don't cancel your classes, but maybe when they come in on Monday, you have like a guided meditation class or a dance history class, or, you know, something that's more of an active recovery.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also back to that scheduling, you know, don't schedule back-to-back competitions, one weekend and then the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Quality, quantity.
Right. What should a dancer do if they're injured?
So if they are injured, obviously, like first things first, tell the teacher, tell your parent. That's step one, definitely. So obviously there's different levels of injury. Injury is a very broad term. It's everything from just like difficulty dancing to like, I cannot dance. So when we're in those like lower level, like really just make sure that the teacher or your parents know. But if it's something that's kind of like, if it's like a low level, it's just a little achy, a little uncomfortable, it's something you can watch for a couple days just to see. Now, definitely regress activities where like do what you can without pain, but don't push through pain. And see how, if it like kind of goes away in 2 days, or it was really like vague, like, oh, it was just a little achy, but it went away. Like those types of wordings. Those are something you can kind of continue, but monitor. But something that's recurrent, especially in the same area, it always comes up. If it's something bigger that causes swelling, bruising, sharp pain, stabbing, anything involving the back, even if you think it's low, that goes to a medical professional. And they can determine whether or not it's something you can regress activity for a little time, be able to maintain activity at the time, or stop activity for a time. So going to someone with, like, you can go, most states, you can go straight to a physical therapist.
And this is where we advocate for having your resources in place before the injury happens. And this is something that should be talked about with all the parents, all the teachers. They should know who this team is before things happen.
Right.
So, you know, take time to connect with the practitioner, find and connect with the practitioners in your community. PTs are a great first point of contact, especially if you find someone who's passionate about working with dancers and has that background. They're going to want to work with you because, I mean, it could be a source of patience for them, but also they're passionate about it and they'll want to help you. And so having those relationships in place where maybe to even the point where you can just give them a call on their cell phone and say, hey, I've got this kid whose ankle's been bugging them for a week. You know, do you think we need to go see an orthopedist? Should I have you look at it first? Having somebody who's actually in the medical field to make those decisions instead of trying to navigate it yourself. And then plus PTs are connected to all of the other medical providers in your community. So like Tracy said, she just had a chat with one of the orthopedic surgeons at Children's Hospital. Like they know these surgeons, they talk to them every single day about their patients. So they're going to be better equipped to refer out in that case.
And they'll make it happen faster. So if you don't know who to reach out to, then you have to wait, you have to see when you can talk to them, and maybe it's 2 weeks till I can get an
We're
appointment.
relying on the parent to go and find it on their own, where you already have this person that if somebody is injured, you can say, here you go. And just a side note, Doctors for Dancers is an amazing organization that exists to connect dancers with physical therapists and doctors who are experienced in treating dancers. Because I think that's really, really important to note that most parents maybe don't understand that, it's not a doctor is a doctor is a doctor, or a PT is a PT is a PT. Like they have to be versed in treating dancers. It's a very niche segment of the population, and they need very specific things. And so doctorsfordancers.com, if you're looking for a physical therapist who specifically works with dancers, you can visit them and they'll find one, they'll help you find one in your area. And they're growing leaps and bounds. So hopefully they are able to help you with that. But again, doctorsfordancers.com. And then we have a comment here from Elizabeth Kessler. Question really, is the age guideline true for college students as well?
Kind of once you hit 15 hours, you start to kind of be at the higher risk of injury. This is a lot of most of that information is taken from like pediatric guidelines, but pediatric goes all the way up into 18. So it depends on the age. But really, if someone's coming to me as like a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, and they're telling me they're doing 15 hours plus of dance-related activity, I'm already on that, like thinking there might be some overuse going on. Generally, the amount of hours of exposure to dance does kind of dip as you get into your 20s, just because it becomes more that freelance world, or if you're on a team, it does start to drop a little bit.
And when you're in rehearsal, when you're on a job, you're not dancing for the full 8-hour day.
Yeah, it's the full, like when you're moving, not just like, oh, I'm at the studio. So I still stick to that guideline. It doesn't come as clear cut. Like the age doesn't continue necessarily. It's more that like around that 15 hours, there is a heightened risk for activity. And then sleep, we talked about sleep also. Throughout any high performance athlete time frame, age, whatever, it's still an average of 7 or more hours a night. If you aren't getting that, you are like, oh shoot, I forget, it was like 2 times, 3 times more likely to get injured. So
the kids that are up burning the midnight oil, trying to get their assignments done and homework after they get home from dance, that is a tough one, because you know that they're not getting the amount of rest that they really need.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's hard. Melissa, are you connected? Can you hear me? I want to make sure I have Melissa here. Hang on, guys. Sorry. Technical difficulties. There she is. We have double Melissas on the screen right now.
Ooh.
I love that. So, and one more time, just to be super clear, tell us one more time, what are the injuries we need to pay special attention to? When do we need to go? Let's not just put our foot up. Let's not just, ice it. When do we need to go? What are those red flags? When do we need to go to a PT?
So if it's anything lasting more than just like 2-3 days,
Okay.
If it's any swelling, I would go. Pinpoint pain is acute pain. That means you need to go.
So if it's not my arm hurts, but it hurts right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Acute pain, easy identified. You can touch it. You need to go. If it's more vague, and it's only like a day or so, that's fine. If it's something that's long-standing, you need to go in. I would, anything with back pain that's like tension, tight, achy, discomfort, more than like a couple days, I'd get it checked out. So back, especially with our like youth, our adolescent, all of that, they should not have back pain at all. So that is a big one that we see, is a bit of hypermobilities. And that one is kind of one of the more high level concerns and more long lasting conditions. So that one's a big one. But even like tweaked ankles, rolled ankles, those are something that would benefit from physical therapy, because once you roll your ankle once, you're 80% likely to do it again. So that's something we want to see.
Okay, thank you so much.
Mhm.
Melissa, you want to take us through the homework that everybody has?
Yes, we love homework. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Having major Zoom problems over here. So I've been trying to manage my Zoom issues.
2020.
Yes, welcome to 2020. It's almost over. Actionable items. So each week we like to give a action item for people to move forward with as they go into the next week. So one from Katie and one from Dr. Ferguson would be awesome. What is the one action that you want our listeners to take between now, other than me, which is not to give them a holiday, not me, just in general? I feel judged, but you want an action you want our listeners to take between now and next week to make progress in this area.
Okay. I'm going to say make a connection with a local physical therapist. Find that person, find that go-to if you don't already. It costs you nothing. It's easy to do a little research, make a couple phone calls. They're going to be jazzed. They're going to be like, what? A big dance studio with hundreds of competitive athletes?
Right.
Yeah, I want to know you. And it's going to be a great resource for your studio.
Should they be looking for specific credentials or qualifications? Because not just because they have a local PT doesn't mean it's the PT that they
right.
So Doctors for Dancers is a great resource, but I know there are some cities who do not yet have practitioners on that listing. So they should definitely have DPT. Mm-hmm. That means they have earned their doctorate of physical therapy. You could still find somebody with a dance background. You could look up like the highest ranked PT clinics in your area and just call them and say, hey, are there any DPTs at your clinic that have worked with dancers or have a dance background? Mm-hmm. I would be explicit about asking that. Mm-hmm. There are some other credentials you can look for. OCS is a board certified orthopedic specialist. Mm-hmm. SCS is a board certified sports specialist. So even if you can't find somebody who personally has a dance background, if they have an OCS or an SCS, they are a very high level doctor of physical therapy and should be willing and very able to analyze the individual athlete and what their sport is and adapt accordingly. Mm-hmm. Another credential that a lot of DPTs have, which can serve us here, is CSCS, which is a certified strength and conditioning specialist. Okay. Those are the main ones, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Dr. Tracy, what is your homework for the week?
Two sides. Okay, for my dancers, homework is 7 hours of sleep average. That is like, start now, set your schedule, you sleep for 7 hours. Okay, that's their homework. Dance teachers, organizers, studio owners, all of that homework is next time you're with your dancers, start talking about aches and pains and make a culture where you can talk about having discomfort, feeling pain, feeling achy, not sure if you're moving the right way. Make it a non-judgmental conversation where they just feel comfortable coming to you with those problems, because most injuries don't get reported because dancers are afraid to mention them. So creating a culture where it's safe space to talk about this is my biggest homework I can give.
Awesome. 2 great assignments to lead us into the next 7 days. 2 that I can definitely do. I can definitely tackle both of those. So I also just want to highlight some of the points that we had earlier in the session here. Building a ramp up after we come back from breaks is also a very important action item in general. Long-term thought process. So not necessarily looking to that next competition, but the long-term, what do we want for our dancers long-term as far as their health and the maintenance of their body. scheduling using the age equals hours formula, and having the resources in place before injuries happen. So making sure that you have those resources in place before they happen. Also, the STEPS module on ApollaPerformance.com is also a free resource. And Bree, would this be under dance, science, and medicine?
It covers everything. It's going to cover racism, gender equity, dance medicine and science research, sex abuse and prevention, integrative dance, and nutrition. So
Right. But topics like this would specifically be under the dance, science, medicine, and research module, for sure. So definitely use that as a resource. It's totally free. It's out there for dance educators and studios and teachers and even dancers who may be able to take that module moving forward. So Bree, would you like to close us out?
Yes. So you guys, this full episode, and all of our episodes are going to be available to watch on Facebook Live and Apolla's IGTV at Apolla Performance, as well as Turning Point Dance Creations at TPDC_on_IG. And if you register to join us on Zoom, you'll get a recording of every episode that we do. We ask that you share so we can get the word out and affect real change in our community. We are looking for experts and episode topics for 2021. So if there's something you want to know, please email us info@apollaperformance.com or message us at Apolla Performance on Facebook or Instagram. Thank you, Katie, so much, and Dr. Tracy Ferguson for joining us today. You guys have been so insightful and so clear on what needs to happen. Just to recap for everybody, Katie's homework was make a connection with a local PT this week in the next 7 days. If you're a dance studio owner, educator, director, you want to make a connection with your local PT to make sure you have a plan in place for when injuries do happen. And Dr. Ferguson says to get 7 hours of sleep for the dancers and for the educators to start talking about aches and pains with your dancers so that we have an open line of communication, a free-flowing line of communication, so that our dancers feel comfortable in talking about these things and communicating about them. And we're creating a better, more healthy studio culture for our dancers, which is why we're all here, right? So as always, thank you to Melissa for being on this journey with me. Join us next week, 11:20, as we chat with our expert panelist, Kelly McCauley, and ask, what is our responsibility for social media safety? We hope you join us for that conversation, because it's a big one and it's affecting so many of us, and especially our young dancers. Until then, we hope you continue your journey beyond the steps. You have lots of homework to do. Everybody have a great weekend. And ladies, thank you again so much for being here. So great.
Thank you, Bree and Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Have a great weekend.
You too.